Hello, this will be part 2 of my series of videos on my Pump It Up SX machine. So this is going to be a thorough deep cleaning of every single part of the dance pads. There's still lots to do, so there'll be another one of these afterward for the actual cabinet itself and some other tweaks and things. But yeah, what I'm going to do is just take these all the way apart, clean all the pieces, put them back together, and do some tweaks to make them play better. This entire process was extremely lengthy. I clocked about 19 hours from start to finish on doing all this. So yeah, this is 16 times sped up footage of taking the whole machine apart, or not the machine, everything in the pads apart. This was about, what you're seeing now is about an hour, 40 minutes worth of time, condensed into 8 minutes. So yeah, just taking these things apart in the first place is pretty long. So let's see. I took off the panels, got the screws into that container. It was helpful to keep screws separated into containers so I knew which one went where, and made sure I didn't lose anything. So yeah, triangle brackets come off, panels pull up easily enough. Then the same kind of screws hold down the metal surfaces. Underneath those is a support piece. I don't know its actual name. But yeah, those are big heavy metal things that hold up the surface panels. Sensor brackets, the things that make contact between the panels and the sensors. These are the most annoying thing to deal with because there are 4 per panel, 3 screws each. So it's 120 screws to take out and put back in. And annoyingly, this is a part that I have to take out and put back in multiple times during this entire process. So yeah, doing all of these for the entire pad is just exhausting and feels like it goes on forever. But it was necessary for this process. Let's see. So each of those switch frames, the metal piece that holds in that goes under the panel, those are held in by 4 screws at the corners, and the stationary metal parts, the supports for those are held in by the same 4 screws around the corners. So those will come out once the sensor brackets are off. Got a container for these screws. So yeah, when this pad came to me, it was fairly dirty. Not as dirty as the first one that I got, but still definitely needed some work. You can see some dust in the arrow wells. It's not super visible, but it's there. So I'll be vacuuming that up once I get some of these things out of the way a little bit more. One of my concerns whenever I play on a new, well, all the 2 times that I've played on a used machine that I've bought, is that little bits of rocks and dirt and things they go through the cracks between the arrow panels and can potentially get under the sensor brackets and start being pressed into the sensors. The sensors are pretty durable, so this hasn't actually been a problem yet, but I'm always a little bit worried about it, because I know that thing can potentially destroy a sensor. I haven't seen it happen, but I know it can happen. I'm working in kind of a small space, so it's a little hard to figure out how to get my body around where it needs to be for unscrewing all these things. So see me in some kind of strange positions during this. Anyway, so that should be the last of the sensor brackets. All those little black plastic things are they're the spacers that let the things move freely when the screws are tightened fully down. So I got those out of the way. Next thing to come off is the decorative metal plates on the top. Those have Phillips head screws that tend to get dirty and can strip. This one right here, I think, I work on it a little while, can't get it out. No, it's this one. And that one ends up getting stripped. So I need to bring in a Dremel tool, cut a slot in it, and get it out with a flathead screwdriver, because the Phillips part just stripped too much to be usable anymore. So that one will have to be replaced. It happens with one other as I go along this. Fortunately, those are easily replaced enough. They're not in a place where I'm stepping, so the screw head type, well, I guess some of those are. Those 2 that I'm taking out are. But it's not too big a deal. The screw head type is kind of very important for screws that go on a dance pad. A lot of people countersink their pads and put completely flat profile screws in them. I just leave the stock ones on that stick up just a little bit, but I need to be careful about which kind of screws I use so that the heads aren't too thick and get in the way when I'm stepping. But for most of this, I can just use the stock screws that come with it. It's only those 2 that need to be replaced. For the other pad, everything was extremely rusty, and I had to replace every single surface on every single screw on the entire surface of the pad. So that was a process. All right, so sensors are coming out now. The sensors are connected with Molex connectors and have this little thing sticking them to the frame of the pad. It kind of just gets in the way, and once I unstick it, I can't really put it back on, and it has to come off if I want to move the sensors or swap them around at all. So I'm using a putty knife there just to help me peel it off, because it's stuck on pretty good. But I just sort of discard that component because it gets in the way. It doesn't really do much good. I guess it does help keep the sensor wires out of trouble, out of places where the panels might press down on them and cut them potentially, but I don't find that particularly necessary. Alright, so finally get to vacuum this out. Little bits of pixie sticks were one of the most identifiable pieces of junk that were inside this pad. Apparently it was hosted in a place where pixie sticks were sold. So yeah, definitely not the dustiest dance pad I've ever seen, but there was, enough to be worth vacuuming out, definitely. I haven't taken off the metal supports yet, because they were pretty dusty. I didn't want to just get that dust all over the place. I wanted to do one vacuuming first, then take those off, then do a second, more thorough one after that. I'm wearing ear protection for this because I don't want to hear a vacuum cleaner that loud for that long. I take care of my ears because I don't want to lose my hearing. Alright, so those can come off finally. Big heavy pieces, and I can vacuum inside those places. They managed to accumulate dust somehow. Not nearly as much as everything else though. Inside there I found a token from the arcade that this had come with. I showed it to the camera, but you couldn't see because it was so fast, I'm sure. So my camera runs out of battery right about now. So I didn't catch the very last little bit of this, but I just took off the rest of the switch frames and vacuumed the rest of that, so you didn't miss too much. So I switched cameras, using an older camera here. Just got a bucket of soapy water and wiped that off just a little bit to make it slightly cleaner, because the vacuum cleaner only does so good a job. Yeah, so this video camera that I'm using primarily, I don't have a charger for the battery, and it can't operate while it's charging, which is kind of annoying. I got a second battery for it after this, so this wouldn't happen again. But I'm using an older camera. It has a narrower field of view, only records 1080i instead of 1080p, and it's just not as good for me, but just used that for a little while this one was charging, because I didn't want to stop this process to wait for a charge. Anyway, so those are cleaned off reasonably. So now we go to my kitchen, and I've already got a big pile of dust on my counter from having moved these switch frames over. So that shows just like how much these were carrying, just because I had set them there briefly, and that's all the stuff that fell out. So those are one of the dirtiest components. Just get that mess cleaned up a little bit before I move on. So what I'm going to end up doing here is basically a whole lot of dishwashing. I made some markings on the switch frames about where they came from, just in case it mattered. I think they're all the same, but just in case there's some like small inconsistency and it happens to only fit one way or another, I wanted to remember which one was which. So that was what that Sharpie mark on the bottom of that you saw briefly was. So these little rubber things, those are called corner stoppers. They are a thing that the panel can press against that is not the sensor, so that the entire weight of the player doesn't go entirely on the sensors. Basically just gives it another platform to sit on, and can be involved in sensitivity and stuff. They're held on by 2 screws each. Yeah, so disassembling the switch frames is definitely necessary. Well, not definitely. I found it necessary because I wanted to clean them quite thoroughly. Again, they're one of the dirtiest components. They're also kind of a pain to get apart and put back together, as you'll see in a bit. These screws come out easy enough. The rubber corner stoppers aren't really a problem. But the sensor channels, they're actually glued in place. So once I take them off, I have to re-glue them to get them back on. So that's not an easily reversible process. They kind of just peel off pretty easy. And there we go. So that's now just bare metal, ready to be cleaned. So whatever kind of glue they use on the sensor channels is very, it's kind of thick, very visible. It's yellow and can be peeled off of those pretty easily. I just kind of roll it off with my thumb and peel it off there. I remount them with super glue that's a whole lot thinner and doesn't leave this particular kind of residue. I don't know exactly what it would be like to peel them off again and re-glue them. I've only ever done this once with any single dance pad. It'd be nice if I knew exactly what kind of glue they used here, because this was satisfying, and it came off real clean. Like the sensor channels after this just had nothing on the bottom of them. Had to peel a little bit of it off the switch frames too, but yeah, comes off clean. I don't think the super glue would come off that clean, unfortunately. So this is a slightly destructive process. So yeah, dishwashing, like I said. Just fill a tub with water, get all the components. That's all 40 of the rubber corner stoppers. Work at them with a toothbrush or a dishcloth or my fingers or whatever. Get everything all cleaned up. You can see how blackened a lot of those things are. The blackness didn't come off entirely, but most of it did. Just toothbrush it till it looks reasonably clean, rinse it off, put it on a towel, then do that 39 more times. So I mostly just capture the first one of each thing that I clean. But yeah, just multiply each thing by 40. This was a long process. Sensor channels. Pretty simple components, not too much in them to clean. Stones can occasionally get in the bottom part. There's like these two ridges, and in between those I found a couple of little tiny rocks to get out. And that was the main thing to clean there. But also just sort of get the Katon outer dirt off of them. Switch frames. These do not fit in a tub, so I use the entire sink for this one. The water got very dirty after each of these components, so I'm using new water for each thing. I don't show the full process, but yeah, it gets super dirty. And like I said, these are some of the dirtiest components. Just use a toothbrush on every surface of them. Get them nice and clean. I had to use the putty knife that you saw for taking off the sticky sensor sticky things. I don't know what to call them. I used that to scrape off rust on the switch frames on the other pad that I have, because it was in worse shape than this one. This one was not particularly rusted. It was, I guess, not used in a humid environment as much as the other one had been. So at least I didn't have that to deal with. That would have made this much more annoying. These took a little while. They have a lot of little surfaces to clean off. So I looked at how these are constructed. They're just one sheet of metal, pretty thick, cut out a certain way and bent over. There's no welds on them or anything. I don't know how they bend metal that nicely. But yeah, just cut it out, bend it, punch a couple of holes, tap them with the appropriate screw threads. And that's what those are made. Like, I'm interested in being able to manufacture something like this myself for, say, if I ever wanted to do a second attempt at building an In the Groove pad. The one that I have came out pretty good, but I would definitely like to put something like this in them. I could maybe just buy like 8 center pump-it-up switch frames, which would fit appropriately, but I don't know for sure that I'd be able to just purchase enough of those. I'm kind of interested in metalworking. I'd like to figure out how to make those myself. Alright, so back to the other camera, wider field of view, so you'll get to see my microwave clock and see how long this takes me and how late into the night it actually goes. So those sticky things on the sensors, being careful not to actually cut any wires. I just cut them off. They're attached with little tiny zip ties because I just don't want them there. They're not a useful component. I can't stick them back on directly, so just best to get rid of them, throw them away. It does feel a little weird to be throwing away components that were in this dance pad, but some of them just don't have a very useful purpose, so it just makes sense to get rid of them, and I don't want to keep them around if I'm not going to put them in the pad. I decided it might not be the best idea to immerse the sensors in water. It probably is fine. I assume they're sealed reasonably well, but they do have a tendency to split on the sides sometimes. So just in case I know I do have at least one slightly split sensor in here. still works fine, but it has a split in it. I wanted to make sure that like I wouldn't get water trapped inside it and make an electrical connection where I didn't want one, just in case that was going to be a problem, or corrode the wires inside or something like that. I haven't ever actually taken a sensor all the way apart. I kind of know what they look like on the inside, but not exactly. So anyway, I just sort of run them underwater and wipe them off so that I'm not immersing them fully. Triangle brackets. Same deal. Put some water in, use toothbrush, get them clean. This is something that's at the surface of the pad, so it can partially be cleaned without taking the thing apart. But the sides of it are what get the most dirty, so we got to take them off to do that. Nice and shiny. Sensor brackets. These have a little foam thing stuck to the top of them. I've done this before, fully immersed in water. It didn't come off, so whatever it's stuck with is not that sensitive to water, I guess. So I just put them in the tub and wash them off like any other component. It has not been a problem so far. Now, after washing, of course, since I'm washing them with soap, this gets rid of the lubrication that I did to that one when I had to fix the sticky sensor in the first video for this. So I'll be redoing that when I put them back on. Arrow panels. Don't really need to immerse those. I don't really want to also. So just put some soap on, wipe off the surface. Again, the sides of that are usually what get dirty. The bottom gets surprisingly dirty too. Those were all a little bit blackened, so I got to wipe off a layer of dust on that so that the lights will come through better since they're cleaner. So now the metal supports. I don't know what these are called. The thing that the stationary metal panels sit on top of. These are also kind of a pain to clean. The little ones are different from the big ones. Yeah, right, that area that I'm scrubbing right there accumulates the most dust. So I had to pay some attention to it. Again, on the other machine that I cleaned, these were getting very rusty, so I had to scrape off some rust with a rougher tool. I did not clean my other machine this deeply. I might eventually go back and do that. This was kind of a pain, though. It went on for just a little bit too long. It was mostly fun. Like, I do enjoy this process. I just wish it took, 8 hours, let's say, instead of 19 hours. I could do this for 8 hours, and it'd be fine. 19's a few too many. This is split over 3 days. So yeah, this was my 9-hour cleaning session on this day. Yeah, so you can see it's 1:27 a.m. already. I just wanted to finish cleaning all of the, oh yeah, so there's a bigger one of those. These are different because they have those two channels on the bottom just for extra support. I can't really get into those and clean them very easily, so the best I can do is just run water through them like I did there. Every time I did that, I saw a big clump of dust come out the other side. So they did get dirty, I just can't really scrub them off, so just rinse them, scrub the surfaces I can reach easily. Yeah, so just on this day I wanted to finish getting the pad all the way apart and cleaning everything in it. I didn't do reassembly until the next day after this. Reassembly's a little bit quicker and easier than disassembly in cleaning, but... Now why would that be? You'd think it would take a little longer, but it doesn't for some reason. Yeah, I wanted to be real thorough with these, because again, they were one of the dirtier components. In between each of these clips, I'm of course drying off those things and putting them in the appropriate spot. getting the next thing to clean. So the surface, the stationary metal surfaces, these actually still had some of the sticky stuff that that pads ship with on the edges of them. I don't think they had ever been taken off of that machine. They were in pretty good shape for not ever having been taken off. But yeah, I got to peel off a layer of protective film, which is always fun to do. So again, this is a thing that's on the surface of the pad, so you can clean the surface of it at least without taking the thing apart. But I wanted to be thorough. And just like the last thing, these come in 2 different sizes. They don't get super dirty though, just a little bit. Just a wipe off with a washcloth is enough. Larger one also has the sticky film on it. Whole bunch of dust was coming off when I peeled those off, of course. So that kind of took care of most of the side cleaning for me. On the surface of this particular panel, there were a couple of stubborn spots that I had to rub off with my finger. But everything came clean pretty well. There were no particular rusty spots that just would not come out, really. So yeah, once this was done, everything was shiny and new looking. It's very satisfying to see a dirty, dingy looking pad go to pristine shininess. So these big metal pieces that just are around the edges, yeah, those also had little bits of the sticky stuff around the screw holes that had never come off. These are kind of big and unwieldy and not too easy to clean, so I just sort of get whatever I can over the sink, clean it that way. They don't need a particularly thorough cleaning because they don't get all that dirty. And again, you can reach the surface of them without taking the thing apart, so these have probably been cleaned a couple of times along the time that the machine was in the arcade. Yeah, I get the impression that unless you're at a place that really cares about their machines and will do a lot of maintenance on them, these things don't get opened and cleaned very often, if at all. This machine was probably from about 2008. That would be my guess as to how old it is. Somewhere around there. I could probably get a more exact guess, but somewhere around there. So yeah, this is like 9 years of dirt on these things. So yeah, lots of different shapes. Just kind of have to do whatever I can with each one. Get it clean somehow. Another little stubborn spot on that one. And this is the last thing I had to finish cleaning on this day. You can see it's past 2 a.m. already, so I was very ready to go to bed after this. So with that done, that's all the components I had to take to the sink. Plus, you know, the rest of these that I don't show. Alright, so now, it's the next day. I'm doing reassembly. So switch frames are the trickiest thing to reassemble, because I have to glue the sensor channels back on. So the corner stoppers go into the corner easy enough. The screws that go in there actually go through the switch frame and down a little bit. I found out that they go into holes in the pad frame. They're actually how the switch frames are aligned. So the screws go down into the holes and just kind of hold them in place until I get everything else on and aligned properly. I was worried about alignment when I was putting all this stuff back together. You'll see me deal with it when I deal with it. But it turned out not to be an issue at all. So those I'll screw on. And the positioning of the sensor channels is just a little bit tricky in this. So this is one of the tall switch frames. The center one is easy because you can just put it against the corner stoppers in a sort of clockwise way. You'll see in the top and bottom ones what I mean. So the positioning of the holes for the sensor brackets on the pad frame kind of determines where the sensor channels want to go. Because the sensor brackets basically should go across the center of the sensors. And the sensors are slightly asymmetric. The sensor bracket position is asymmetric, so I had to figure out exactly where the right position for this was. I took some reference photos, but they weren't as helpful as I thought they would be for positioning these. But yeah, the basic idea, once I get these on, basic idea is just that sensor channels go against, so on the short runs, so like all four in the center panel, top and bottom on the corner panels like this one, the channel just goes directly against the corner stopper that's clockwise from it. You'll see me do it in a moment once I get these screws tightened down. It was a little hard to tell when I had these screws tight because I'm screwing into rubber. And you know, it compresses a little bit. There's just this little lip of it that I'm screwing into. So yeah, anyway, it feels a little funny to do it that way. This table that I'm on has a vinyl surface, and I don't want those screws to be like punching into it too much. Yeah, so you can see those stick down a little bit. And I have a marking on the bottom for which switch frame this was when I took it apart. I actually ended up swapping two of them, so their markings aren't accurate anymore. But I just wanted to keep track just in case it happened to be important. Those are different on the ends just because of since they've had sensors sitting in them for so long, the edges that wrap around them on one end are kind of, how do I say it? They bend outward because the sensors have been sitting there so long. They just kind of take the shape of what was inside them. And on the one side, it's a little bit wider than the other side because of the shape of the sensors, basically. So for some reason, I wanted to get them in the same orientation if I could tell. So yeah, that's Gorilla Super Glue. The bottle recommends 1 drop per square inch, so I just put 6 drops distributed evenly on the bottom of each of these. Hold them in place for about 15 seconds each. Seemed to be enough. And yeah, just try to get them positioned in the appropriate place. So yeah, clockwise corner stopper for the top and bottom ones, dead center for the other two. Centered between those two. Those holes that I see next to that don't seem to have a purpose. There's nothing that goes through them. There's nothing under them, so I don't know exactly why they're there, but they are useful for alignment. Yeah, I can't think of anything that would go through those, but they're just sort of there. I was worried I would run out of super glue for this, but this one bottle got me through all the frames, all the channels. Doesn't take very much. And those are firmly in place. That's one done. Now do that 9 more times. Alright, so more 16 times sped up footage here for reassembly. Switch frames sit in there, metal supports sit in there the same. I wanted to put everything in and get the screws in there just a little bit so that I could shift them around and make sure nothing was overlapping or, you know, too close so that things couldn't move, things like that. Turned out that wasn't an issue at all. There's more than enough play in these things that, like, I can just sort of put them in, screw them down right away, and it would be fine. So yeah, a whole bunch of screws go in. Like I said, reassembly is a little quicker and easier than disassembly. Everything's clean, don't have to worry about vacuuming or, you know, dumping dust in places I don't want it to be dumped. Things like that. And it's not too hard to keep track of which piece goes where. So I put the surface metal on there just to make sure that, you know, that it had room. I hadn't screwed anything down in a place that would not be compatible with putting those on. So tighten down the switch frames. Then once those are done, take the surface metal back off and tighten down the supports that are under it. I didn't bother taking off the bars to clean under them. It doesn't get very dirty back in there, and so that style of bar is a little different from the one I have in my other pads. I actually had a problem with one of the support posts. So bars used to be two-piece things. There was a bracket on the bottom with these two big metal posts coming up off of it. Then the tubes themselves sort of slid down over those two posts and were held in place by a couple of screws. One of the posts on one of my my brackets in the back had actually come loose, so I had to take it to a machine shop and get it re-welded. But that's not an issue with this newer design where it's all just one piece. Anyway, so those are on. Putting the sensors back in the channels now. Connect them up. And I don't have this extra sticky thing on the side, so I just make sure the wire is not going over top of the corner stopper, which is the place you don't want it, because that's where the panel sits, and you could potentially cut your wire like that if you put it in there wrong, but it's easy to avoid. All the wires that are for the LEDs and that connect to the sensors had to be carefully routed. They were all kind of tucked under the LED modules so that they wouldn't get in the way of the light. So, putting the sensor brackets back on now. Have the WD-40 there, spray it onto a Q-tip like you saw in the last video, and just rub it on the inside of each hole in the sensor bracket so that it's fully lubricated. Yep. Just to make sure I don't get any sticky brackets. Those little black plastic things, the spacers, those are kind of a pain to get the screws into. The holes in them, in some of them, weren't quite large enough for the screw, so I had to kind of force it through. That was one of the more annoying parts. I don't like dealing with those pieces, because there are so many of them, and they're such a pain. And like I said, they have to go on and off multiple times during this process. You'll see me taking some of those off again once I get to sensitivity tweaking, which will happen in a moment after I get this reassembled. Again, not much space, so you'll see me get into some kind of weird positions for this. So, I don't finish all of the pad maintenance I have to actually do this video. This takes care of all the panels and all the cleaning. There are a couple of other things that need to be done. The left side that you can see of the bracket that holds the pads together, that's still missing its screw threads. I have some ideas for how to fix that. It's kind of a puzzle for what to do there, because there are pieces of the frame welded into place that make it impossible to access that area. There's just this one little access hole, which is where the player 2 pad's wires come through to connect to the player 1 pad. So that's all the space I have to work with to put some kind of new threads in there to hold them on. I have an idea for how to do it. I'm going to try it and see if it works, but it'll be another video where I actually get that done, I hope. Because right now I can't play anything too hard on double mode that would risk pushing the pads apart. Like, it shouldn't. They don't really move around too much. The feet hold them in place pretty well. So I'd probably be able to get away with it, but it's still a worry in my mind, because I don't want them suddenly coming apart and, you know, damaging the bracket at the back, or the wires that connect them together, or something like that. So it'd be best if those had threads and I could actually connect them fully. I'll figure that out somehow, someday. So, sensor brackets are all on, finally. Can get the surface pieces on where they go. This was another thing where I wanted to put the screws in a little bit, then be able to shift the things around once they were all started to make sure they all fit appropriately. So I go around once, just putting the screws in the first place, and I'll go around again, doing them more thoroughly. So the way those are put together, with the two-piece bars, the back piece that has the caution, never operate while wearing high heels or slippers sticker on it, that's all one piece because it can slide up over the posts of the bar bracket, since the bar can come off from the outside. But in this case, it has to be 3 pieces because it has to go around the bars, since you can't, it's not possible to slide it up if that's all just one piece. So that's a little bit different from my other pad. And it does mean a few more screws to put in. So now I'm going around and actually tightening those down now that I've shuffled them all into place appropriately. Alright, those are in. Panels just sit on. I'm not going to put on the triangle brackets right at the moment. I had not screwed down that switch frame, I found out. It felt loose. Alright, so setting those in was for a reason. I wanted to check the recess of them, so I'm going to adjust that now. I have this foam mounting tape. It's sticky and has a layer of foam on the inside of it. This is apparently what most people use for adjusting their dance pads. The first one of these that I adjusted, I used these little rubber feet that like you put on the bottom of appliances, just because they happen to be the same, the appropriate width for de-recessing this, because I want the panels to be at the same level as the surface of the switch frame. They were down about 1/8 of an inch or so, which equated to about 2 pieces of this mounting tape. I probably could have gotten away with 3 if I wanted them in a little bit tighter, but I used 2 on each of the sensor brackets and each of the corner stoppers. So anyway, I want to de-recess it like that. The problem with the rubber feet that I used last time turned out to be that they were actually a little bit too rigid. This foam tape is squishier and gives the panel more space to move up and down. Like, you don't want a whole lot of that, but you want just a little bit of it so that it can... the main reason for squishiness is so that if you step in the very corner of the panel, that part can go down so that the 2 sensors on the sides closest to that corner can actually be triggered. Because if you have something too rigid holding the panel up in the corner, then it just won't be able to move, and stepping in the corner of it will not trigger the sensors very well. And stepping in the very corner of panels happens a whole lot in Pump It Up especially, and in any dance game really, because you want to minimize movement. The corner is usually the closest part to wherever your foot is. So on fast stuff, you just usually step in the corner. So it's very important that stepping in the corner of a panel can actually trigger the sensors and have the appropriate sensitivity, so you don't have to hit it way harder than everything else. After I put all the rubber feet in my other pad, I was noticing that it was not quite sensitive enough around the corners. So the biggest thing, a thing that I did to it that helped tremendously was to take the feet off the corner stoppers and replace it with the same mounting tape. So yeah, that's definitely very important. I still have the rigid rubber stuff on the sensor brackets in that pad. It seems to work okay. Now it does make another difference that I discover in just a moment after I finish this process that needs to be accounted for. Because, so since I'm putting down all mounting tape here with the the protective backing still on it. That peels off easily and has another sticky surface on it. I could peel it off and put another piece of tape on it if it comes off on its own, for example. That's what I would do. Yeah, so that's de-recessed appropriately. But the problem is that has a very slippery surface on it, and I tried playing on it once after I did this, and it was extremely noisy because the panels could slide around very freely and just slam into the sides of the switch frames around them. So I didn't like how noisy that was. I think the reason this didn't happen in my other pad is because I had those rubber things in it that had a lot of traction on them, so if the panel tried to slide, it was just stopped by the rubber. But here, it's on a slippery surface. So my solution for that is to use some more foam around the outside of the switch frame. Just give the panel something to bump against on the sides that's not metal. You don't want too much here because it still needs to be able to move around freely. But this happened to be just the perfect thickness to go on there and give the panel just enough room to go in and not be stuck, so it can move around and up and down and stuff. But be padded so it's not extremely noisy when it's sliding around. And also it feels a little funny, like I can feel it sliding when it moves. I'd rather it just kind of stay in place and go up and down, but not side to side. So yeah, just a few more little pieces of this mounting tape take care of that problem. I had to go out and buy a second roll of this, so I couldn't finish this in one day. So I think this is on day 3 now of this process. It takes a lot. So yeah, this is just 3M Scotch mounting tape from Lowe's. Those scissors were slightly problematic for cutting it. They kept sticking in a way that I didn't want to. I had to learn how to cut it with them. There might be a better tool for this, possibly. Or maybe it's just down to my technique. So I only single layer this. I have double layers of this tape on the holding the panel up, but single layers holding it to the sides. And I think the protective red stuff on it is probably is liable to peel off, because when I put in the panel, it can kind of sort of try to peel it off. So I might have to replace that with another piece of tape. Yeah, so that's that panel done. Do all the others. And start up the I/O check. So now I'm doing sensitivity tweaks. So what I do here is I start up the I/O test. I press my fingers on each sensor. This is something I just had to learn to do by feel for how sensitive I want things. So when I press 1, I'll either say good, +1, or +2. After I recorded this video, I just used it as a reference for what I had said for each thing, so I could remember what I needed to tweak. So, good means I don't have to do anything. +1 means I want one layer of material under the sensor to elevate it. +2 means I want 2 of them.
Good. +1.
So every panel needed some adjustments.
+1. +1. +1. Good.
I have the triangle brackets on. They have to be on for this. Then I have to take them back off again to tweak everything. So that's another thing I got tired of putting on and taking off all the time, but it's necessary for this. Some people run their pads without brackets. I don't do that. I don't like the way it feels. But that would be different. I have different concerns for how to tweak this.
+1.
Player 2 center panel needed a lot of tweaking.
+2. +1. +1. Good. 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 +1.
Alright, so I have that reference. I put Mancala stones on the sensors, the number that I needed to tweak it, just so I could keep track a little bit easier. So those are those little colorful glass things you see on there. Handy thing to have around if you just want to physically count something. So those come back off again. Panel comes up. And my least favorite thing to do, of course, I have to take off the sensor brackets for this. So business cards are the tool that I use for elevating the sensors to make them more sensitive. Index cards work okay. Just any kind of thick paper is about the right thickness for this, or even just thin paper folded over itself enough times. It is funny that paper is the best tool for this, but it really is the best tool for the job. Just old design business cards that I don't use anymore, and I had some spares around. I'm actually running out of those. I've tweaked too many dance pads with them. I have to get some more someday, or some other paper for this. I'm not going to order a box of business cards just to cut them up and put in dance pads. That would be silly. Anyway, so I had a +2 on the left, +1 on the right. So I just cut a strip of the appropriate width out of a business card after taking out the sensor. You could just shove those up under the sensor bracket without taking it off, but I find that putting it all the way inside the sensor channel keeps it in place better, because it does tend to sort of work its way out of the top of the sensor bracket if you just put it there. Like, that's a viable quick fix, but it's not ideal. So for a +2, I just cut a wider strip and fold it over itself. You can also kind of get the sensor out and put the thing in and put it back in the channel without taking off the bracket, but that's always a pain. It's hard to get it, like, tucked in around the lips of the sensor channel that hold it in place when doing that. It's possible, but I don't know. As much as I hate taking off the sensor brackets, I still find that easier than doing it the other way. There's actually another problem with this panel that I'm going to discover in a moment after I put this back on and check the sensitivity again. I've forgotten a layer of tape in one of the spots. It's very easy to do because it doesn't look too much different when there's one layer of mounting tape versus two, because it's reasonably thin. Just got to pay very close attention when putting it on to make sure I get the right number of layers. Alright, so those are back in. Brackets still move freely. I always check that every single time I put them back on. And color stones can go away. Seems fine without brackets. So this is why it's a pain to put the brackets back on, because the screws are kind of annoying about getting started on the threads. Like, it takes a lot of tries sometimes. Once they're in the threads, it's fine. It's very easy. I just kind of... Yeah, come on, get in there. I just kind of spin them with my fingers real quick and get them most of the way down, then finish with the Allen wrench. Like that. As long as the threads are in good enough shape and not rusty or anything, then that works pretty well. I got a tap and die set not long ago, and I was kind of eager to try using it on something. I tried it on a rusty screw that would not go in and out freely, and with the die I kind of managed to destroy the threads on that screw, so that has to be used carefully. I did use the tap in one of the threads in the switch frame to clean it up, and that worked much better. But yeah, if there's a stubborn one of those, just a metric M6 tap and die can clean it up potentially. I'll have to figure out what I did wrong with the die, why I managed to destroy the threads in the screw. I must have just misaligned it, but yeah, once I had used it to try to clean it up, I put the screw back in, screwed it all the way down, and it just kind of popped back up. So I just replaced that screw. Fortunately, I have spares. So those feel good, but then I check the corners, and that corner is not in good shape. I cannot trigger the sensors too well by pressing there.
Okay, so that's too much. That's a problem.
That is a problem. There are a few things that can cause this. Sometimes you just actually need more mounting tape. I'll spare you taking off the triangle brackets again, because that takes a while. Sometimes you actually just need to add more mounting tape in some spot or another, because it's not level. But I discover...
Well, that's only one.
That's only one layer thick. So I just got to put another layer on that. And that actually fixes me right up. There were some other tweaks I had to do that I didn't end up getting on video for this.
So now +2 will probably be too much.
The panels can sort of rattle around and be noisy if all 8 of those surfaces that it contacts are not level. So it's just a matter of pressing on each corner of it, seeing if it rattles, figure out why that is, add a little bit more tape to elevate it so that it doesn't rattle around, basically. Yeah, I was worried that since I had to add another piece of tape, maybe my +2 was more than it needed, but that didn't feel oversensitive when I pressed it there. I was worried it might. Corner's fine, corner's in much better shape. And so basically the reason you don't want to make a pad too sensitive is because vibrations can trigger the panels, but stomping right next to it there caused no problems at all, so that's in good shape. And then just finally, one last thing I want to do to these pads. The padding on the bars, which was stored in this shoved down position just down the side of it, it wasn't doing me any good down there, and it wasn't going to do me any good up at the top where it normally is supposed to be. So I like to just remove that stuff. It just gets in the way. It's not useful. Just get rid of it. Because basically if the padding went all the way, wrapped all the way around the top of the bar, it would be fine. But it's too narrow. The way I hold the bar, I just get the sides of the padding, which just makes it more uncomfortable. So it's held on by a zipper and 2 zip ties, and has a little bit of foam padding on the inside. This one had a piece of tape around it. I was not used to that. The other ones that I've taken off have not had that. And then the padding on the other bar is different for some reason. So if I wanted to put these back on, I'd have to put new zip ties back through those little tiny channels. I don't know how hard that would be. Probably not extremely hard, but it'd be a little bit of a pain. But I don't know why I would ever put these back on. I still have them. I didn't throw them away or anything, but I don't expect to ever use them for anything. Yeah, so this padding has a shiny metal surface on it for some reason. I don't know why. Just like whatever random padding they could find, they throw in there, I guess. This is like pipe insulation or something, I think. Alright, so those are all tweaked to perfection.
So I got all the stuff I did with the pads on video.
So this is before I had taken the padding off the bars. I did that after this. This was from a stream I did. So with all those, all the tweaks that I had done to these pads, they feel just super amazing. Like they're tuned to absolute perfection. This is by far the best feeling dance pad that I've ever played on at this point. So my hard work paid off. Still not playing anything too hard on double, because again, the bracket in the front is still broken. Also, you can kind of see the wires coming out. I need to replace the pad connector tube because, like the first machine I got, that one was kind of crushed and in terrible shape. The wires are fine, but the tube needs to be replaced, so I'm waiting on a replacement for that to arrive. So yeah, a couple of more little tweaks, but the surface of the pad, the arrow panels and everything is just in extremely good shape. When I did the work on my first Pump It Up pad, it pretty much stayed after I had done this kind of stuff to it, so I'm hoping this will stay in as good shape as it is. Like I've said before, my plan for this machine is to put it in a public location, so it's going to get beaten up, it's going to get dirty, people will play on it with, dirty shoes and stuff, because not everybody is as careful about these as I'd like them to be, and I can't be there the entire time supervising or anything. So when and if that happens, then I'm probably going to have to do some routine maintenance on this pad. But for now, it's in extremely good shape. Still haven't made any progress on that, by the way. Don't have any new leads for a place to put this, but I'm sure I can find one eventually. And I still want to keep this at home and work on it a little bit more before I'm ready to take it someplace. Because there's some stuff I need to clean up in the arcade cabinet itself. That'll be a separate video, because this one is definitely long enough already. But yeah, so a whole lot of work, a whole lot of tweaks, but the result is extremely good, so I'm happy that I did it. So I'm going to enjoy playing on these for the duration that they're in my house. So yeah, I'll see you again for a cabinet cleaning and fixing video. Just a little bit more to do on that.